And now, in my proper capacity as meeting secretary, I can happily welcome tonight's speaker, Nick Higham. Nick is an orphan journalist who, for 30 years, was a correspondent for BBC News. He originally joined the BBC and as its first media correspondent. Is that right, Nick? Yes. And one of his final roles was as presenter of Meet the Author on BBC News 24, if you know that programme. He left the BBC in 2018 and since then has focused on his activities as a historian. In 2022, he published The Mercenary River, Private Greed, Public Good, A History of London's Water, followed last year by Mavericks, Empire, Oil, Revolution, and the Forgotten Battle of World War I. Tonight, he'll be sharing some of his findings from that latter book, which tells the story of Kipling's friend Lionel Dunsterville and the fast-moving campaign he waged in northern Persia and the Caucasus at the close of the Great War.
How do I do that?
I think
what do I click on?
Well, I think where is his view? Yeah.
Oh no, please, please don't speak during the recording, since we are recording this video and it will be available later to members.
Bottom, full screen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Alex, is it possible to switch that screen so that I can see my upcoming slide on that laptop?
Yes, we'll be able to do that just in a second, Nick. Mike will take care of that for you. Before Nick begins his speech, I have a treat for you, for those of you who are here in the room with us at the Army and Navy Club, courtesy of our Honourable Librarian John Walker. As many of you will know, the centenary of the Society is coming up next year, and John has brought in a very early membership card by one of our US-based members, J. Delancey Ferguson of Ohio. It says here on the card, #1 member, Ohio. And the reason that we are showing you to this tonight is because it bears the secretary of Lionel Dunsterville as the Society's original president. So, yeah. As the original president of the Society, yes. Please pass that amongst you here in the room. I should add also that Nick's book is available on Amazon, and for those of you here in the room, it is here on sale tonight, either by card or by cash. And we'll come to that later. But now, without further ado, over to Nick himself. Please tell us this wonderful story of Dunsterfalls.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and whatever time it is with you. Hello. I'm going to ask Alex if he can just switch that screen back to my presentation so I can see not you people listening elsewhere, but the slide coming up next, so I know what to say. Thank you very much indeed. As Alex has suggested, this talk is based on my book, Mavericks, which appeared in October, so you were part of the book tour, along with various book festivals and so on and so forth. It's about what I have chosen to call the Forgotten Battle of World War I, and it's also about 5 men involved, British men involved in that battle, which was fought in August 1918. Can I make this move on? Can I make this move on? I need to. There we go. There we go. It was fought by a tiny British force in support of a local army of irregular Russian and Armenian citizens, and it was fought, like so many battles, over oil in the oil-rich city of Baku, which is today the capital of Azerbaijan, but which in 1918 was part of Russia. And to save you surreptitiously looking it up on your phones, I have provided a map. There, which shows you where Baku is. It's on the west coast of the Caspian Sea, promontory sticking out into the sea. The Caspian looks like a rather sort of small lake, but actually it's a very big sea indeed. It's about 600-700 miles from north to south and about 200 miles across, and it's bordered today by Russia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Kazakhstan, I think, but don't hold me to that. But in 1918, it was bordered by Russia and in the south by Persia. As I say, it was fought over oil. I'm going to have problems with this because the clicker is not responding.
It couldn't hard, yeah.
Yeah, pardon me?
Give it a good hard push.
I'm giving it a good hard push. I'm really ramming it down.
Like Kipling, we can't see anything on Zoom.
You can't see anything.
Can't
You
see
can't
your
any
slides. No.
Can you see me? Can you see
Yes.
anything at all?
I can see the slides on Zoom. You must have the wrong setting on your computer. You
Okay.
need to go to the right view.
Okay, thank you.
I've gone to side-by-side speaker.
Yeah, I can see them too, the same.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm a third person who can also see the slides. I don't think there's a problem there.
No, there isn't. So I find it. Thank you.
Okay, so we can now see the slides, I hope. Baku was synonymous at the early part of the 20th century with oil. They discovered oil there in the 19th century. In 1900, half the world's oil came from Baku. Now I pressed it too hard. I've gone on one too far. And in 1918, the British sent this very small force to Baku in order to prevent the Turks and their German allies getting access to Baku's oil. It was a significant strategic venture. And as I say, the book is about not only the battle, but also about 5 men associated with it. The first, whom you will be, I imagine, familiar with, at least in passing, is Major General Lionel Dunsterville, who was the commander of this little British force, who had been at school with Kipling. The second was a young man called Reginald Teague Jones on the right, a former policeman in India turned intelligence officer. The third was this chap, Toby Rawlinson, who was a colonel in Dunsterville's little army. The fourth was a man called Edward Noel, grandson of the Earl of Gainsborough, unusually for an English aristocrat, a Roman Catholic. He was a soldier, he was a diplomat, he was an adventurer, he was an agricultural reformer, he was an opium addict, he was a plotter, he was a spy. When he died in 1974, his obituary in the Times said of him, if anything was said to be impossible, Noel felt obliged to have a go at it. And the fifth man was this chap, Ranald MacDonald, who was Britain's man in Baku. He was the British vice consul in Baku. He was an oil executive in the oil industry in Baku for many years before the war. He was then co-opted into the war effort and became a spy, and in later life, all sorts of other things. Now, this is the only photograph I know to exist of MacDonald. So when I give these talks, I leave him out because there's no point in trying to give a talk about a chap if you've only got one photograph of him. And this is the only known photograph, and which photograph it is too, of Edward Noel. So we don't tend to talk about him. I won't talk tonight very much about Toby Rawlinson. There are photographs of him. He was a wonderful, extraordinary, exuberant character who was basically addicted to dangerous sports. He was a world-class polo player. He was a member of the British Olympic gold medal winning polo team at the 1900 Olympics. He was a pioneer aviator. He held British pilot's license number 3, and he was a racing driver before the war. And I will show you 2 photographs of Rawlinson. One is him with his car. Now, Alex, I may ask you to press that button. That's right, good. Sorry, you've got a job now for the rest of the evening. I'm sorry about that. This was Rawlinson photographed in his racing car on the Isle of Man in 1914, practicing for the 1914 TT races. It was a brand new, high-performance, American-built Hudson racing car, which he had specially imported. It was capable of doing 80 miles an hour. If you move on, Alex, next slide. This is that same car in November 1914. Rawlinson had gone to the front in France with a number of other members of the RAC, the Royal Automobile Club, who had volunteered to provide drivers and cars for British staff officers to do reconnaissance and so on and so forth. There are about 24 of them. And you will see that the car has undergone in the interim some changes. It's acquired mudguards and running boards for one thing. On the two front mudguards, there are two Pickelhaube German helmets, which Rawlinson had somehow captured. And mounted on the bonnet is Rawlinson's personal machine gun. After he'd gone to France, after a few weeks in France, he decided it was rather dangerous and he needed better armament. He had a revolver, so he made a quick trip back across the Channel to Cannon Street in London, as you could in those days, and bought two machine guns, which went everywhere with him for the rest of the war. And one was always mounted on the bonnet. And the other thing you can see about the car is that it's got a number of bullet holes. He had been shot at, he had shot people, he captured a German cavalryman who he chased and unhorsed, and he claimed to have shot a German officer and a German motorcyclist at a roadblock. And he pitched up as part of Dunsterville's little army. Next one, please. Now, Dunsterville was well known to a wider public because of his relationship with Rudyard Kipling. Next one, please. They had been to school together at the United Services College in Westwood Ho in Devon, which was housed in this row of what had been intended to be holiday boarding houses, but the Westwood Ho had not taken off as a resort, so they've been repurposed as a school. Next one, please. And if you go to Westwood Ho, which I did last year, you will find, next one, please, that at the bottom of the slope there is a plaque commemorating the fact that the USC was there and that Rudyard Kipling was educated there. That's about all there is to see, but if you're familiar with the Kipling stories, it's quite an atmospheric place. Next one, please. Dunstable went there as a very small boy. I think he was only about 9 when he first went, and he was very badly bullied. And he claims in his memoirs to have written letters home to his sisters signed in blood. And I couldn't resist trying to find out whether this was true, and it is sort of true. Dunstable's correspondence is at the Cambridge University Library, and this is a letter which he wrote not to one of his sisters, but to his guardian, a Mrs. Spiller. His father, who was an Indian Army officer, lived in Heidelberg and more or less abandoned his children, as far as I can see. So they lived with Mrs. Spiller. And young Dunsterville has obviously been told, he's been sent back on the train at the beginning of term, and he's been told to write a letter as soon as he gets there. Mrs. Spiller has said, I want you to fill 4 sides, please. So he starts off, dear Mrs. Spiller, I hope you are quite well. I arrived here all right at about 5:45. We had a jolly journey. It was quite fine. And then he gets bored. So the rest of the letter is filled out with one word per sentence. And he doesn't quite get to fill all the pages. But on the back, on the next slide, there is this written in my blood, really, with only one L, because I cut my finger with my knife. Amen. It's not clear whether the cut finger was a deliberate act of, desperation, or whether he just cut his finger. And in his memoir, he says that he doesn't recommend signing letters in blood because it congeals very quickly and it doesn't run off the pen very easily. It's very tricky stuff to write with. Anyway, next one. His time at the school looked up considerably when Rudyard Kipling arrived, and you must all have seen this photograph. Next one, please. That, sporting a moustache, is Rudyard Kipling while at the school, sporting moustache and the thick glasses, which gave him the nickname Gigs for gig lamps. And they and a third boy, G.C. Beresford, teamed up. Next one, please. And they became the terrors of the school. They became pranksters and tended to run riot and so on. And 20 years later, Kipling wrote a set of school stories, Storky and Co., about the adventures of 3 boys at a school which was quite clearly based on the United Services College, and the 3 boys were based on Kipling himself, Beresford, and the ringleader of the gang, Dunsterville. Nobody, neither Kipling nor Dunsterville, ever said publicly Dunsterville is the model for Storky, but everybody sort of knew it. And this gave Dunsterville an interesting kind of parallel existence, because he was a professional soldier, went into the Indian Army, had a very successful career in the Indian Army. He spoke 8 languages. He was quite a formidable character. But at the same time, because he was stalky, everybody sort of expected him to behave in ways which were slightly unusual, slightly out of the box. He used to find this extremely irritating, actually, because he was expected to be funny when he didn't much fancy being funny. But it was, you know, if you have to bear a burden, there are worse burdens to bear. Next one, please. Now, in my book, I say that I believe that, but have no evidence, that Dunsterville was chosen for this expedition because it was known that he was stalky. The people at the India Office and the War Office who were sending him knew that the what was described as a hush-hush-push top-secret mission was going to be extremely difficult to pull off. It's a mixture of a sort of diplomatic and a military affair, and they needed somebody who was a bit unusual, who could think outside the box, and Dunsterville fitted that bill. As I say, I didn't have any evidence that that was the case until Jan Montefiore pointed out to me a letter, next one please, which Kipling wrote to his friend in it says Dear Lionel at the top. Are we just masking that? No, we're having a little problem here, aren't we? Anyway, it was written in November 1918, just before the armistice, and it's addressed to Dear Lionel. There we are. I have been following the Baku affair, naturally with the most intense interest, writes Kipling. I guessed it was you even before I was told, and I knew it was absolutely the one job you would love. Next, please. The War Office, into which I stray occasionally, wanted to know what manner of man you were. I gave them a lurid, but on the whole, not untruthful summary of your character and nature. Now, unfortunately, in this letter, which then goes on to mention Kipling's first meeting with a Colonel Lawrence, an Oxford Don, who was an emir of the Arab Empire, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, Kipling doesn't say when he went to the War Office. Was it quite recently? Was it some time previously? But I'm prepared to believe that he went and spoke about Dunsterville when the War Office and the India Office were planning this expedition. And it is indeed the case that Dunsterville was sent because they thought, who can do this job? Only one person. It has to be Stalky. So what was the job and why was he sent? Next one, please. He was sent because in 1917, October 1917, Russia underwent a revolution. Next one, please. Dunsterville was set out, next one please, from Baghdad in Mesopotamia, which the British had recently captured from the Turks, to cross what is now Iran, was then Persia, some 600 miles to the Caspian Sea, where he was going to get on a boat and go to Baku, next one please, and then he was going to take a train from Baku to Tbilisi, Tiflis as it was called at the time, by the British. And there he was going to take charge of a tiny British mission and would become, it was hoped, a sort of pivotal player in the war in the Caucasus. Why was he sent? Next one, please. Well, as I say, in November 1917, by the Western calendar, Russia had undergone a revolution. Next one, please. The Bolsheviks were in power. Lenin, Trotsky were in charge. And one of the reasons why the Bolshevik revolution was successful in Russia was that the Bolsheviks promised to take Russia out of the war. Which was deeply, profoundly unpopular in Russia at the time. And that is what they did. They reached an armistice with the Germans, but even before that, their armies had basically just melted away. They'd spontaneously demobilized. Russia's armies on the Eastern Front and in the Caucasus, basically down tools, turned around, and pushed off home. So, next one, please. In the Caucasus, where the Russians and the Turks, Germany's allies, had been fighting one another, next one please, there was no Russian army standing between the Turks and Baku and its valuable oil. And Dunsterville's job was basically to bribe the peoples of Georgia and Armenia, and if he could persuade them, what is now Azerbaijan, to go on fighting the Turks to keep them out of Baku, even though Russia's principal armies had disintegrated. That was one reason he was sent. There was a second reason. Next one, please. In 1916, John Buchan had published a tremendously popular book called Greenmantle, which had envisaged a Turkish jihad pushing eastwards into Central Asia, raising the Muslims of Central Asia and threatening Afghanistan and India. And the British strategist's nightmare in the First World War was that something would happen to undermine the security of India, which was vital to the British war effort and which had supplied the armies which had conquered, most of the armies which had conquered Mesopotamia. And so the fear was, yes please, next one, that the Turks, if they got to Baku, would then just get on a boat, go across to what was then termed Trans-Caspia, which is now known as Turkmenistan, and push on eastwards. And the Brits were desperate, the strategists were desperate to prevent them. Next one, please. So Dunsterville was sent off on this mission, initially without any troops. He set off from Baghdad, that's him in a staff car on the left, with 12 other officers, 2 sergeant clerks, and 41 Ford vans driven by 41 Army Service Corps drivers. And the vans were full of equipment, but particularly money. And the idea was that Dunsterville was going to distribute this to the Georgians and the Armenians to try and keep them fighting. Next one, please. Here is one of those Army Service Corps drivers with one of those cars or vans. It was a pretty tall order because they were going to have to cross Persia, a country which at that time had no roads suitable for wheeled traffic. Next one, please. And they set off in January 1918 in the depths of winter over passes many thousands of feet high and then across the Persian plateau, which is itself about 6,000 or 7,000 feet high, bitter cold. It was an extraordinarily difficult journey. Next one, please. When they got to their destination, a port called Enzeli on the Caspian, they were, as I say, they were going to get onto ships and set sail. Unfortunately, when Dunsterville reached Enzeli, which he got to after about 6 weeks in February 1918, he found that Enzeli was in the hands of a Bolshevik Soviet, as indeed was Baku itself at the time. And they refused to allow Dunsterville to go any further because Dunsterville's avowed aim was to keep the war going. He wanted to keep fighting the Turks and the Germans, and the Bolsheviks' stated aim was to stop the war. And they were damned if they were going to let him get on a boat and undermine their efforts to bring about some sort of peace. So for months, he got stuck in Persia, where he busied himself. There was a famine, so he engaged in sort of famine relief. Next one, please. He built roads, both in order to give the locals some work so he could pay them, and also to improve his own transport and supply back to Baghdad. And I do love this picture. That is an Invicta steamroller made in Kent, which has been brought all the way round through the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal and round the bottom of Arabia into the Persian Gulf and up the Tigris River to Baghdad, and then it's presumably dismantled. It's been taken over these immensely high passes, and there it is in the middle of the Persian plateau doing a bit of road building. And the other thing he did, next one please, was train local men, local militias to fight the Turks should the Turks invade. And he was given, in addition to the original sort of 40-odd people he'd set out with, he was given consignments over the next few weeks and months of a total of around 400 volunteers, all from the white dominions, if we can call them that, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. They were all officers or NCOs. They were, people like to say they were a sort of special forces in embryo. I don't think that's quite true, but they were a tough bunch, and they were given the job of, for the most part, which I'm not sure is what they'd signed up for, they were given the job of training local militias. Next one, please. The problem was that to keep this force, tiny though it was, supplied, required enormous numbers of vehicles and denuded the British Army in Baghdad of much of its motor transport, really infuriated the British commanding general in Baghdad, who was throughout obstructive and negative and generally very unhappy about this whole enterprise, which he thought correctly, actually, he thought was mad, and it was mad. It was bonkers plan. Next one, please. We have a lot of excellent documentation, photographic documentation of the expedition, because for part of it, it was accompanied by this man. It's called Ariel Vargas, and he took most of the pictures that I'm showing you. He was an American newspaper photographer and newsreel cameraman, and he was embedded. This is not a British uniform, because he had the honorary rank of captain in the British Army. I think this must have been a later photograph of him when he went back to America. But he was an official war photographer for the British Army, and he was okay as a newsreel cameraman. The footage, when you watch it, is rather disappointing, because that's, 1918 newsreels were not very exciting visually, but as a still photographer, he was splendid. Next one, please. It wasn't until the beginning of August that a coup in Baku overthrew both the Bolshevik regime in Baku itself and in Enzeli, and Dunsterville was enabled to send his troops to Baku, which by that stage had been surrounded by the Turks and was essentially under siege. And here are British troops unloading artillery in the harbour at Baku. Next, please. And here is Vargas' picture of the locals queuing for water. There was a desperate shortage of both food and water in Baku. Next, please. And here is Vargas' photograph of Dunsterville on board the ship, which he used as his command post, moored in the harbour, with some of his officers. Some fairly straightforward picture, but Dunsterville had also been sent some sailors, Royal Navy sailors, and a Commodore of the Royal Navy, a man called Norris, Commodore Norris, and some naval guns, to take possession of Caspian Sea merchantmen and create a sort of Caspian fleet, Caspian Navy. Next one, please. This is the photograph that Vargas took of Dunsterville and Commander Norris, and they looked to me like a sort of, it's an extraordinary pose. They looked to me like a kind of musical duo. Dunsterville's a tall man, and he's got his arm up like that. And Norris is a sort of picture of probity, but of course below the waist he's wearing these absurd shorts and socks, and they really don't quite look the part. But anyway, Norris did create a fleet, and it was engaged in a fleet action against a Bolshevik fleet on the Caspian, and neither side could claim a victory, a bit like the Battle of Jutland in miniature. Next one, please. So by the time he was allowed to go to Baku, Dunsterville had about 1,200 troops. And as soon as they got to the city, they were rushed up to the front line one way and another. Next, please. There they were spread out among the local troops who were guarding the city's perimeter, who were mostly Armenians, but not very satisfactory soldiers. They were conscripted workmen for the most part, who were reluctant fighters. They were very close to home, so they often used to go home in the evenings for sleep at home. It was much more comfortable, spend time with their girlfriends in the Mars. Next, please. And when they weren't doing that, they were having political meetings. This photograph, again by Vargas, is captioned "Armenian soldiers on their way to a political meeting." Everything was decided by political meetings, or more importantly, since these are revolutionary socialists, wasn't decided. There was a great deal of discussion, but not a great deal of decision. And another picture, next one, please, also shows Armenian troops on their way back into Baku for the evening, deserting the frontline trenches. And in the background, you can see the oil derricks spread out there against the skyline. Next one, please. And Dunsterville spread his thin troops out among the Armenians in the hopes of sort of stiffening their resolve and making them rather more effective as soldiers. And this is an Armenian rifleman and a British officer in a foxhole. Next, please. One of the units that he had in his little army was the 7th Battalion of the North Staffordshire Regiment. And this is one of Vaj's photographs of the 7th North Staffords marching through Persia. Next, please. Some of them didn't have to march. Some of them actually got to ride on mules. God knows what the lads from Stoke-on-Trent thought of that. Next, please. And they, the 7th North Staffords and their D Company, was sent to defend a strategic point on the outskirts of Baku called a mud volcano. And mud volcanoes are apparently a feature of oil-bearing regions, and they periodically erupt. This is a later photograph of the mud volcano outside Baku. Next one, please. And that's the view from the top. Showing the oil rigs which they were there to defend. And the North Staffords, next one please, marched out from Baku, took the train for basically one stop to as far as they could go before they hit the Turkish front line. And having detrained, next one please, they spread out across the landscape. And this is captioned North Staffords advancing under Turkish machine gun fire. So I imagine a distant machine gun firing rather erratically at them. And there they are, burdened by their kit, marching towards the mud volcano, which you can see on the horizon. Next one, please. And when they got there, they met up with some of the locals who were already in position. Next one, please. And then they dug in and awaited the Turks. And it's an unsung tale of heroism. These lads, mostly either new army volunteers or conscripts, they would have had absolutely no idea where they were or why they were there. But by God, they fought. Next one, please. This is a picture of two of their officers in their dugout on the mud volcano, which was known as Dirty Volcano because, like everything else in Baku, it was covered by a thin film of oil. One chap later on said it was like the floor, everything in Baku was like the floor of a very dirty garage. You know, everything got covered in oil. And while they were there waiting, next one, please, two of them at least died, one of cholera and one of diphtheria, and were buried in the town cemetery. But then on the 26th of August, after Vajis had left, so there are no photographs of this, the Turks attacked, and the company of the North Staffords on the Dirty Volcano was effectively wiped out. 70 men were killed, 35 were wounded. All the officers were either killed or wounded. Next one, please. And there is a memorial in Baku to the British dead of the First World War. And top right, you can see a number of names, men belonging to the North Staffordshire Regiment. There are, I think I counted 17. Dramatically understates the casualties which the North Staffords suffered on the 26th of August. Next, please. And that battle was one of a number where the local Armenian and Russian troops, volunteer troops, proved to be no use at all. They ran away as soon as they were attacked, according to the British, but all the British are unanimous about this. It really does seem as if these chaps had not been trained to fight. They were badly officered. They were no help at all. And inevitably, after 6 weeks, Dunsterville withdrew his troops to the harbour and evacuated all the survivors successfully overnight. Not an easy thing to have done, but evidence that he and his staff were, at the very least, competent military commanders. Next one, please. And in the harbour, there were also many ships crammed with refugees. Baku at the time had a population which was roughly half and half Christian and Muslim. And throughout the previous 15 or 20 years, there had been periodic pogroms, one side against the other. First, the Muslims would massacre the Christians, and the Christians would massacre the Muslims, and so on. And the Armenians knew that if the city fell, they were likely to be massacred, and that is indeed what happened. A lot of them got away, but many more did not. Next one, please. After Dunsterville evacuated, the Turks took the city, and this is their victory parade through the streets of Baku. But the Turkish army, the regular army, delayed 2 or 3 days before it entered the city proper, in order to allow the local Muslim population to eliminate their Christian neighbors. And I can't swear to this, but it seems to me pretty certain that this was the moment at which Baku went from being a multi-ethnic, multi-religious city to a purely Muslim one, which is what it is today. The population of Baku is 90% Muslim. Next, please. I'm going to talk briefly. I'll revert to Dunsterville in a moment. I'm going to talk briefly about one of these chaps, and this man, Reginald T. Jones. Next, please. T. Jones was originally just Reg Jones from Liverpool. His dad was a school teacher, but by some process which we don't fully understand, he's a very, very mysterious man, Reginald T. Jones. Considering he left enormous quantities of papers to the British Library and the Imperial War Museum with endless memoirs and so on. It's extraordinary how much we don't know about him. But for some reason, as a boy, he was sent to St. Petersburg, probably to stay with friends of his family, who put him through a very elite school in St. Petersburg called the Annenschule, where the teaching was in German. So he came back at the age of about 17 from St. Petersburg, able to speak German, Russian fluently, as well as English, and he could also speak French. And he went to India, next one please, where he became a policeman in the Punjab police. That's a photograph of him in the Punjab police. I'm not very happy in that. That really is because he hated it. He hated being a policeman. However, things looked up after a couple of years because he volunteered for and was accepted for something called the what's it called? It was called it was a border gendarmerie called the Frontier Constabulary. That's right, the Frontier Constabulary. Next one, please. And here is a photograph of him in the Frontier Constabulary, and he loved it. This was on the northwest frontier. They were the constabulary had been formed to try and stop the tribes, the Pashtuns and so on, living in the mountains, from raiding down into the flat country in the Punjab. And T. Jones spent 2 or 3 years fighting a kind of anti-guerrilla warfare in the mountains, the narrow valleys and so on, having the time of his life. And he was so successful at it that in 1916, he was sort of talent spotted and was co-opted into the British Army. Next one, please. Given a commission and made an intelligence officer on the Indian Army Reserve of officers. And in 1918, he was sent to Persia, like Dunsterville. Next one, please. So while Dunsterville was traveling up the sort of west side of Persia, T. Jones was traveling up the east side to a place called Mashhad, or Meshed, which was where the British had maintained for many years a consulate, which was essentially a nest of spies. It was the nearest place the British could get to Russian territory. And when Meshed was established as a consulate, the fear, we were still playing the great game for control of Central Asia with Russia. And the fear was that the Russians would make some play aimed at destabilizing India. And the hope was that the chaps in Meshed would learn about this in time to put a stop to it. And what had happened, as I said a few minutes ago, was that the threat was no longer from the Russians, who had been our ally in the First World War, but was from the Turks. So T. Jones was sent off there to try and find out what was happening just across the border in Turkmenistan, then known as Trans-Caspian. Next one, please. And in particular, he was there to monitor movements on the Trans-Caspian Railway, which ran from the Caspian Sea, what is now Turkmenbashi, all the way to ultimately to Tashkent, deep in Central Asia. And next one, please. He took up residence in the capital, Ashgabat, next one, which was a newly built colonial town by the Russians, next one, please, which was there basically purely because the railway was there. It's full of railway workers, next one, please. And was a well-ordered place before the revolution, but was occupied by a small number of Russian managers and technicians and civil servants, next one please, and a very large number of the locals who were Turkmens, who weren't actually very friendly towards the Russians. However, both the Russian railway workers and the Turkmens had made common cause and had, following the Bolshevik Revolution, they had decided they were going to throw off the Russian yoke. They were going to set up in Transcaspia an independent state, which is also what happened. In Georgia, the Georgians decided they wanted to be independent. It's what happened in Armenia. The Armenians broke away. And the British decided they were going to support this breakaway state. There was a general in Meshed called Malleson who got authorization from the authorities in India and London to bankroll this government because they were anti-Bolsheviks. They were revolutionary socialists, but they weren't Bolsheviks. And they were going, it was hoped, to keep the Turks out, should the Turks arrive. Well, in fact, the Turks never arrived because although they captured Baku, they signed an armistice very shortly afterwards. They were out of the war. They never had a chance to leap across the Caspian. And as a result, the paltry armed forces, supported by a few Indian Army soldiers, in this Republic of Transcaspia, found themselves fighting the Bolsheviks. And this was the first occasion when the British found their troops actually in a shooting war with the Bolsheviks. As you know, following the revolution, there was an ill-fated, disastrous series of interventions by the French and the British and the Americans, the Japanese and so on, to try and throw the Bolsheviks out. The first place where open conflict with the Bolsheviks broke out was in Transcaspia. T. Jones's job was to act as the British point man, the liaison officer with this little kind of puppet government. Next one, please. One of the problems was that Transcaspia didn't have any money. So the British decided they'd print some. And this is a note on behalf of the British government. I promise to repay in ruble notes on or before the end of 6 months, the sum of 500 rubles, signed by Major General Malleson, the man in Meshed. That's what the printed signature says. Actually, all of these notes, thousands and thousands of them, were signed by T. Jones and one other officer. They were never redeemed because the British, shamefully, when it got too difficult, as they have so often on other occasions, abandoned the Transcaspians to their fate in 1919, when there proved to be no political appetite and indeed no money for fighting a small war against Bolsheviks in the middle of nowhere in the middle of Central Asia. And all these chaps that the British had been supporting either fled or lost their lives. Next one, please. However, during his time in Transcaspia, T. Jones did get across at least twice to Baku. This is Baku Harbour. He went by ship. Next one, please. One of these trips, he tells us, he met a rather attractive young Russian girl called Valya, whom he married. So there is a romance in this story as well. They later divorced. Next one, please. He was very cross when he was there during the Battle of Baku. He was on Dunsterville's staff for a couple of weeks. And then this chap Malleson in Meshed said, "What are you doing over there? You're supposed to be my man in Transcaspia. I want you back here." So very reluctantly, T. Jones returned to Transcaspia to find, to his delight, that the Bolsheviks were pushing from the east and there was fighting going on, so he wasn't missing out on all the fun. And here he is pictured after one battle with a bunch of Turkmen fighters aboard a railway wagon. Next one, please. And here he is on the same occasion standing next to another railway wagon which had been carrying explosives, munitions, until unfortunately it had been blown up by a shell. While he was there, he was caught up in something which became one of the sort of founding myths of the Soviet Union. Next one, please. The Bolshevik regime in Baku had been overthrown in a coup, and the British had been invited in to try and defend it, as I explained. And this is a photograph of some of the leading Bolsheviks, including the chap second left, a man called Stepan Shamian, who was a personal friend of Lenin and was a top Bolshevik in Baku. Next one, please. Another photograph of Shamian. After the coup that overthrew them, they were imprisoned, and then when Dunsterville evacuated Baku, they fled across the Caspian, hoping to go to Bolshevik-controlled territory, but ending up in Transcaspia, where, as we've explained, the locals were not keen on the Bolsheviks, and they were arrested. And because nobody quite knew what to do with them, they were put on a train and taken out of the train in the middle of the night in the desert and shot in cold blood by the Transcaspian authorities. There were 26 of them. They're known as the 26 Baku Commissars, and I'm told that for most of its existence, every school child in the Soviet Union learnt the story of the 26 Baku Commissars murdered by the unscrupulous British imperialists under the command of a man called Reginald T. Jones. So there were plays and films and books and a painting, next one please, a very famous painting of the heroic martyrs being shot at dawn. And if you look on the left-hand side, next one please, of the painting, you can see the artist has included 3 British soldiers with their distinctive British Army caps looking on as this slaughter takes place. This is in pure fiction. There were no Brits anywhere near. The nearest Brit was about 150 miles away. T. Jones certainly wasn't there. He didn't order the killings. It is possible that he might have done more to prevent them, because he did know that the question of what to do with these people was being discussed by the Transcaspian government at a meeting at which he was present. And he did not say, which he might have done, whatever you do, don't shoot them in cold blood, because if you do that, you won't be popular with the British. We don't like that sort of thing. But he didn't, and they were, and he carried the rope. And for the rest of his life, he lived in fear of Bolshevik assassination. And I'll let you into a secret that readers of the book don't learn until the last but one chapter. He changed his name. In 1923, I think it was, Reginald T. Jones vanished. And a man called Ronald Sinclair stepped into the world and went through the rest of his life as under a false persona. I said he and his wife got divorced. Valia, he got divorced in the 1930s. That was awkward because it meant they had to get married a second time. Their marriage certificate was in the name of Teague Jones, and divorce cases were widely reported in the press. And Teague Jones / Sinclair could not risk his real name coming out because of the court cases. It was on his marriage certificate. So he and Valia got married a second time under the name Sinclair in 1931, and then 2 years later they got divorced. And the only reason I can think for them getting married a second time was so that they could get divorced without having to mention the name Teague Jones. What did he do in the following years? Next one, please. Well, he traveled. I have no idea who paid him to travel. Some people think he was a spy, I'm not sure. One trip he made was a very adventurous one in a Model A Ford like this one, all the way from Beirut to British India, across the desert to Baghdad, and then all the way through Persia, which by 1923 had got, 1928, rather 1926, did have some roads, but still, much of it was still desert. And he nearly died. He got stuck in the sand in southeast Persia and had to dig himself out. And then a couple of years later, he made the same trip in the other direction, in reverse, this time not alone, but with another chap, this time in a Morris. And there are shots of them digging the Morris out of the sand, again, driving past dead camels. And this was how I first came across him. I was looking for black and white photographs, pictures, newsreel pictures of old India. And I came across this footage of these chaps driving through the desert and thought, that's interesting, unusual thing to do in 1928. And did a bit of research and found out that Ronald Sinclair had this interesting backstory. Next one, there is a photograph of the car underneath a clearly about to totter tower in the Persian desert. And then whatever he did in the 20s and 30s to earn a living, next one please, with the Second World War, he became an intelligence officer again in New York, went to work for British intelligence in New York, and then in retirement, next one please, he wrote endless memoirs, wrote and rewrote and kept the drafts, and all the different versions contradict one another, so it's a nightmare working out what's true and what's not. He published none of it because clearly he was still afraid of exposure, still afraid of the Bolsheviks. Next one, please. However, amongst the papers, there is a novel, which is clearly an homage, if I can call it that, to Kipling. Next one, please. It's in the British Library. It's called Khyber Blood Feud by Ronald Sinclair, OBE, A Tale of the Afghan Border, Parts 1 and 2. It's absolutely dreadful. I tried, but I couldn't finish it. Next one, please. But there are elements of Kim in it, because the central character it's not called Kim, he's called Jim. He's a mixed race child of a Pathan man and an Australian farmer's daughter, so he can pass between the two cultures, much like Kim can. There is an error in the book, by the way, like perhaps several people, many readers of Kim. I had thought that Kim was mixed race, but it's been pointed out to me that he's not. Both his parents were Irish, and it will be corrected for the paperback edition. And the real giveaway, next one please, is that there is a chap called Mahbub Ali, who was a merchant of Kabul and a spy and a horse trader, who was a key character in the book. So straight out of Kim. Anyway, next one, please. Ronald Sinclair Teague Jones did publish one book in his lifetime. It's an account that he wrote of that first journey across Persia in the Model T Ford. And it was published when he was 99 in 98. And this is a photograph that the Mail on Sunday took to illustrate a feature about him. It appeared about 3 weeks before he died, but it did hit the book stands. And he is, I'm open to contradiction in this, but I am pretty certain he was and still is the oldest debut author in British publishing history. Show me another author whose first book appeared when they were 95 and 99. Next one, please. Now, I just want to finish this because you are the Kipling Society with a little bit more about Dunsterville. That is a photograph of Dunsterville taken by the third boy in the trio, the Storky trio, G.C. Beresford, who became a very good professional studio photographer. Next one, please. And Dunsterville and Kipling remained friends for most of their lives. They corresponded, they met occasionally, usually in India, sometimes in London. And in the 1980s, next one, please, Dunsterville's daughter handed over to the Kipling Journal a whole series of extracts from the Dunsterville's private diaries relating his dealings with Kipling. That is the daughter. She was called Susan. That's her first husband. She married two remarkable men, actually. Her first husband was a man called August Lindt, the member of the Lindt chocolate dynasty, who was a very distinguished Swiss wartime resistance fighter. I didn't know there was a resistance in Switzerland, but there was. Look it up. And he became a very big cheese in the UN. Then she married a man called Van Doornink, who was a Dutch soldier who has the distinction of being one of the very few people who managed to escape from culverts. So she picked her husband as well. Anyway, Susan sent to the journal in the 80s a series of extracts from the diary, and I'm just going to read a few of them out to you. Next one, please. This is December 1922, and these are all about the Kipling Society itself and its foundation. I heard Dunstable write some 6 months ago from a man called Brooking, telling me how keen he was on it, a society, and could I arrange to meet him and talk it over next week. I was very much impressed by him. A great Kipling enthusiast, really nice fellow. He showed me all his notes. He's been working on it since 1919, but his appeals remain unanswered. Next, please. I wrote to Kipling about it. In reply, Kipling wrote, as to the proposed society, it is a thing which, of course, I can't stop, but as far as my own feelings are concerned, I certainly don't want it. Next, please. January 1923, a few weeks later, this Kipling Society is rather bothering me, Dunsterville writes. I'm not the real promoter, but have to pose as such. I wrote to RK about it, and he doesn't like it. I like it even less. RK says, why can't they wait till I'm dead and you? Quite so, but they won't wait. Next. March 23, a few weeks later, first committee meeting of the Kipling Society, a failure. Only Brooking, myself, and Ian Hay. Prospects not too bright. I hope it'll end the whole thing. Well, it didn't. Next, please. September 1923, that wonderful fellow Brooking never despairs of the Kipling Society. Nothing seems to dishearten him. Next one. January 24, yesterday Brooking came in to see me about a proposed Kipling Society painting of Kipling, Beresford, and myself as Storky. He wants William Orpin, to do it, but Orpin is very much on the make and weighs his artistic talents in talents of gold. Next one, please. February 24, Brooking dropped in to show me an ultimatum he has drafted and set to send to Kipling, abusing him for not having fallen in with Brooking's idea of a combined portrait of himself, me and Beresford. I thought it was outrageous and said he ought not to send it on. He's quite dotty on this thing. I do like Dunsterville. Dunsterville was a witty, charming, and entertaining man. The five fellows in my book, a couple of them were really strange, but Dunsterville, I'm quoting, Dunsterville's the one you'd have liked to have met. Next one, please. So we've been at this March 24. My book just out and looks very smart. I would have liked to have sent a copy to Kipling, but he has latterly been so rude, not answering any of my letters, that I cannot continue the correspondence. He's making a mountain out of a molehill over that Kipling Society business. Remember, this was, they corresponded with one another, and that first letter I showed you about Kipling going to the War Office and so on was addressed to Dear Lionel. Not, you know, you had to be really intimate with a chap at that stage to address him as by his first name, not by his surname. And now there is a rift. Terribly sad. Next one. April 1926, letter from Ian Hay about the Kipling Society. He and I both thought it was dead, but Brooking seems as lively as ever. He will not admit defeat. January 1927, heard from Brooking, mad enthusiast, who wants me to be the president of the Kipling Society. And Dunsterville accepted. Next one, please. 22nd of June, 1927, the great Kipling Society lunch, myself in the chair. Quite a success, but glad it's over. Next one. And that was the launch of the Kipling Society. Happily, relations with Kipling were patched up. 1930, back to Antwerp via Harwich. Dunsterville lived on an Indian Army pension, which means he was always broke. So during his retirement, he spent much of his time in Belgium or in Italy or France, living in cheap pensions. Back to Antwerp via Harwich. Before leaving, had lunch at the Beefsteak Club, and by an extraordinary piece of luck, Rudyard Kipling walked in just back from Jamaica, and we had lunch and a long talk together. The Kipling Society lunch at the Hotel Rembrandt was a great success. Next one. And what about Storky, the complete Storky and Co. by Rudyard Kipling? What did Dunsterville really think about that? Well, next one, please. We learn from a diary entry from 1938. Kipling is dead and Beresford is dead, and now I can write freely what may be read after I am dead. My opinion of Storky and Co. The foundation is there, as in all good fiction, but fiction is fiction. I have always been astonished, A, Kipling having written it, B, the public having appreciated it. Next one, please. As regards A, I think it very poor stuff, and it seems to have been really inspired by a desire for revenge on various masters and prefects who had incurred his dislike. As regards B, I can see very little attraction in the book. If I had nothing to do with it and came across it by chance, I doubt if I would read more than a few pages. It would bore me to tears. Next one, please. So there we are. A friendship fractured, but then happily renewed late in life. But Dunsterville clearly never told Kipling what he thought of his book. And let me leave you with an image, next one, please, of a book which I hope you won't find boring, which is mine. Thank you very much for listening. Would anybody like to chip in, ask a question, make an observation, correct